Firstly, I'd like to thank everyone for attending. Hi everyone, I'm Darren Fletcher and I'll get us started today. The songs that you've been listening to for the last 30 to 50 minutes were chosen by the grandchildren. Firstly, thanks to everyone for their support over the past month and particularly over the past 2 weeks since Dad passed away. We've been overwhelmed with how big an impact Dad had on so many people over the years. Now, Dad would want us to celebrate his life the way he lived it, rather than feeling sad about him leaving us early. He has managed to fit 200 years worth of experiences into his 75 years and has had an amazing life full of community, family, friends and adventure. Dad had a unique ability to make friends everywhere he went. In fact, I don't think there's a person in the world that would have a bad word to say about Dad. So I'll start with 4. Dad was terrible in the kitchen. His music taste is questionable. He never did any maintenance on machinery, and his fashion sense is terrible as well. The focus is going to be on 3 key things today: an overview of his life, which will cover some of his greatest years. Bill Mulcahy will speak about his cricket tours. Scotty and myself will speak about his community. We've included a few short stories from his mates, and we'll finish with my sisters, Fiona and Christy, who will cover off Dad as a husband, father, and a grandfather before we close. Work-life balance has been the buzz phrase over the last 5 years. What you will hear about in the next hour is a bloke who reversed it to life-work balance. But to kick us off, we have a song and some photos of Dad.
Non, rien de rien. Non, je ne regrette rien. Ni le bien qu'on m'a fait, ni le mal, tout ça m'est bien égal. Non, rien de rien. Non, je ne regrette rien. C'est payé, balayé, oublié. Je me fous du passé. Avec mes souvenirs, j'ai allumé le feu. Mes chagrins, mes plaisirs, je n'ai plus besoin de balayer les amours avec leur trémolo, balayer pour toujours. Je repars à 0. Non, rien de rien. Non, je ne regrette rien. Ni le bien qu'on m'a fait, ni le mal, tout ça m'est bien égal. Non, rien de rien. Non, je ne regrette rien. Car ma vie, car mes joies, aujourd'hui, ça commence avec toi. Non, rien de rien. Non, je ne regrette rien. Ni le bien qu'on m'a fait, ni le mal, tout ça m'est bien égal. Non, rien de rien. rien. C'est payé, balayé, oublié. Je me fous du passé avec mes souvenirs. J'ai allumé le feu, mes chagrins, mes plaisirs. Je n'ai plus besoin de balayer les amours avec leur trémolo, balayer pour toujours. Je repars à zéro. Non, rien de rien. Non, je ne regrette rien. Ni le bien qu'on m'a fait, ni le mal, tout ça m'est bien égal. Non, rien de rien. Non, je ne regrette rien. Car ma vie, car mes joies, aujourd'hui, ça commence avec toi.
Hi everyone, I'm Scott Fletcher, the youngest son of Kenneth. Now, I'm going to talk through Ken's early years, but before I start, I'll just let you know that he never got called Kenneth really. He's probably known much by 4 key names, that being Scott, Dad to us, Grumpy to the grandchildren, Snake to his friends from Skipton, and the manager from all the people that toured with him around the world. So Kenneth Scott Fletcher was born on the 19th of the 8th in 1948 in Beaufort. He was the oldest son of Neil and Dorothy Fletcher. Now, Scott was brought home to the palatial tent that was supplied by Rural Finance as part of the soldier settlement scheme. Yeah, that's right. Dad's first home was actually a tent. And when I reflect on this, it's truly amazing how far he came over his 75 years through life. It was in this tent, followed by a donga, where the three of them etched out a livelihood on 640 acres of land that was allocated to them as part of the soldier settlement scheme. Finally, a house arrived, and that was just in time for the arrival of Dad's sisters, Marg and Kay, in 1950. Scott spent his early childhood, from what Marg says, always in trouble. He was never indoors, and you would often find him aimlessly roaming around the farm, sitting on a dam bank, throwing rocks into the water. Farming was pretty hard back then. Neil had to work very hard to get the farm up to scratch. He had to build a lot of the internal fences, and he worked very hard on improving the pastures over the years, whilst Dad's mum, Dorothy, was a nurse in town. Dad's parents provided a very loving environment for the three of them to grow up in. Now, Scott started at Skipton Primary School in 1953, and he'd catch the bus or even Jim Cush's car into town with the other kids around the area. He enjoyed these school days, but class wasn't that exciting for Scott. Like Neil, Dad was very interested in sport, his favourites being cricket and football. The Olympics in 1956 was a bit of a turning point for the Fletcher family. Neil bought the very first TV for the house, and that was just in time for the 1956 Olympics. Mark can recall the whole family sitting around together, watching the Olympics from start to finish, and that was probably the start of Dad's love for sport, whether it be watching it or playing it. In 1960, Dad was sent away to Geelong College as a grade 6 student. It was actually 1 year earlier than expected because Neil stuffed up the application form and put the wrong year in, which turned out to be a pretty expensive mistake. So off he went to boarding school as one of the youngest boarders at the school. Now, boarding life back in the 1960s wasn't easy. The boarding house was called a Warrin, and there was a number of kids from all over different parts of Victoria and southern New South Wales. You wouldn't believe it now, but back then the boarding house didn't even have windows. The kids slept in the open air, and I think that was part of the reason why Dad had to harden up at boarding school pretty quickly. And now high school didn't come naturally to Dad either. He actually ended up doing a course down at the TAFE at the same time as completing his studies at school. He used to go with Doug Smith, ride his bike down to the Gordon TAFE to do a wool classing course, and he got his accreditation from the TAFE at the same time as he was down at college. Now, also, not many people know this about Dad, but he actually repeated year 11. So I have it on good intelligence that the real reason why he repeated year 11 was that he was actually still a little bit scrawny, and Neil didn't think that he'd be able to play first football or first cricket, so he kept him back a year to grow him out. And it actually worked well because Dad ended up playing first 11 cricket and first 18 football in his final year. So poor old Neil had to pay 2 extra years for Dad down at college. One because he stuffed the registration up, and another one because he wanted him to get a game in the ones. Some of Dad's best mates were made at college, and a crew of them used to regularly catch up in Geelong every 6 weeks or so for a counter lunch and a few beers. These include the likes of Brick Beaton, Jim Coots, Sandy Bell, Nicky Neeson, Ford Strawn, Tiger Moleseed and Des Barr. Dad really enjoyed getting back into a more regular catch-up with these guys, and he always looked forward to seeing them. On returning from school, Dad signed up to play footy at Beaufort, which is a good standard of footy back then, as they were in the Ballarat League at the time. Dad was a pretty handy forward flanker, and he was playing for Beaufort in 1969 and was named as one of the emergencies for their grand final team, where Beaufort went on to win the premiership in the Ballarat League, which was the first time and the only time they ever won a premiership in the Ballarat League. Because he was playing football in Beaufort, he decided to join the Young Farmers Beaufort branch at the same time. It was a way to meet similar young farmers around the area and maybe learn a thing or two from one another. But if I was being honest, I think Dad just liked having an excuse to have a few beers, and he enjoyed the social side of it more than anything. Many of his friends from those early years in Young Farmers have remained really close friends to Mum and Dad over the years. There was Ross and Glenda Diamond from Newland, who were spud farmers, so didn't really have much in common from a farming perspective, but they had similar age kids as us, and we spent a lot of time together and became really close family friends. There was a group of young farmers from Stoneleigh that were running similar farming operations to Dad, and he relied on a lot of those guys for advice, like Paul Heenan, John Chapman and Robert Hayes. He made friends from people from all over the state through Young Farmers. There was Ray Chislett and Ken Solly from Warrnambool. There was Bang and Millard from Hamilton, and there was Ron Fleming from Camperdown. It was actually at one of these Young Farmers balls in 1970 where at the Matamata Hall, where Dad asked Joan Kirkpatrick for the last dance. Mum says that as soon as she held Dad's hand, she wanted him to be hers forever. You would have thought that a new girlfriend might have kept Dad close to home and starting to think about settling down, but he was just getting his first taste of travelling the world, and it took him 5 years to finally ask Mum to marry him after he'd managed to fit 2 10-week-long cricket tours in, tripping around the world. And the wedding was actually planned for a Saturday, late in March in 1975, but Skipton Cricket Club made the grand final. So he shuffled a few priorities around and ended up playing cricket on the Saturday and Sunday, and they got married on the Monday following the successful grand final win at the Stockyard Hill Church. Now, Mum and Dad went on to be married for almost 50 years. They've had 4 children, and they've actually got 11 grandchildren. So a very big family. I've always been in awe of the relationship between Mum and Dad. In most relationships, 1 and 1 equals 2, but for Mum and Dad it was different. 1 and 1 well and truly equaled 3. They were better and stronger together through their support for one another, and also the freedom they gave each other to experience new things and take risks. After their marriage in 1975, Mum and Dad moved back to the family farm and set about building their life together. I'll pass over to Darren to continue from here.
In 1983, Neil passed away from a stroke. This left a huge hole in the Fletcher, Austin and Allingham families. Ever the optimist, Scott began to knuckle down for the first time in his life, aged 35. Coming off the 83 drought, things were never going to be easy. Dad shore all his own sheep in 83 to save money. And as Scotty mentioned, Dad got his wool classing certificate from the Gordon TAFE. Scott would leave home in the morning at Sparrow and head out wool classing for the day. I hear he loved being in the sheds with blokes like Turk Osborne, David Biggin and the mad rouseabout Mark Alford. At 5:30, when it was time to knock off, Dad would grab a traveller out of the fridge and head home to feed sheep or fix anything Mum couldn't do that day on the farm. These were long and exhausting days, but Dad never complained. And he somehow found time every night to kick the footy or bowl to me. During these times, Dad also managed to coach the under-16 cricket at Skipton, play A grade and go away to Bendigo or Ballarat Country Week every year as a player or manager. He also coached the Western Plains juniors at Warrnambool Country Week for 10 years. Dad would always encourage the kids to try their best. And if they didn't succeed, it didn't really matter to him as long as they were enjoying each other's company. My Saturdays in summer consisted of junior cricket in the morning and then senior cricket with Dad all afternoon, driving Reg Graham mad, asking him to bowl to me or any of the seniors. I'm not sure if Dad invented this, but he always told me, rain, hail or shine, you don't go home before 8 p.m. on Saturday. Dad was a shifty leg spin bowler and he batted in the lower order. He played over 300 games of cricket at Skipton in senior level and he's only one of 5 life members. He was president of the Western Plains Cricket Association many times and was instrumental in merging the Minnanira and Western Plains associations in the early 1990s. He never shied away from making the tough decisions regarding cricket in the local communities. He would always say it will make the league stronger if we have more teams. One of the best stories of Dad was when he was managing the Western Plains side in the 1990s at Bendigo Country Week. He was rooming with Ken Gibson. And some of the players on the way home stole a lamb out of the sale yards at Bendigo and put it in Ken and Dad's room. Ken and Dad, both slightly inebriated themselves, thought the lambs that night in Bendigo were extremely noisy. It wasn't until the morning they discovered they had an extra roommate. Scott was rewarded with a 50-year service medal to the Victorian Cricket Association a few years back with his great mate John Graham. He was so proud of this achievement, but I feel Mum and Jill probably should have been given a medal too. It wasn't long into Dad's farming career that the UK and cricket called again. After getting the travel bug on the old Collegians tours, Dad thought he would organise a Western Plains tour for 1986. Yep, you do the math. He knuckled down for 3 years. Somehow for 2 years, Dad sat down and wrote letter after letter to cricket clubs overseas, seeing if they would host and play the Western Plains boys. This is no mean feat, as a letter took 2 weeks to get over there, wait on a reply, basically a month. Every night, Dad sat down at the table writing these letters, and as kids, we never missed anything. He would still do everything with us, whether it was tennis or netball for the girls or footy and cricket for me and Scotty. Dad did tours in 86, 89, 93, 97, 2001 under the Western Plains banner. And I'd like to call on Bill Mulcahy to speak about these tours and the impacts they had on the young men that he took. Bill.
Yeah. Firstly, can I thank the Fletcher family for the privilege of being able to be up here and speak today. I'm not going to pretend for one moment that I can do justice to Scott in all he did for people like me with cricket, giving us the opportunity to do what we did. But if you bear with me, I'll do my best. I'd known Joan and Scott Fletcher all my life, but in 1985, our friendship took on another dimension when Scott said to me, "I'm taking a team from Skipton to the UK to play cricket next year. Do you want to come?" "I'd love to," I said. "That sounds unreal." And during that 6-week trip, at times, many times in fact, it truly did seem unreal. The idea of circling the globe, visiting the USA, playing in England and Wales, and coming home through Asia was hard to imagine. But we all knew Scott and had every confidence in his and Joan's organisational skills. But to be perfectly honest, I didn't know what to expect. And none of us were all that worldly when we hopped on Macca Smith's bus in Skipton and headed to the airport. We hadn't made it as far as Lenton before a car with headlights flashing came up behind us. Macca pulled over and Robbie Osmond's mum stepped on board saying, "You might need this," as she handed Robbie his passport. Instantly, we all checked through all of our luggage to see we had everything we needed. Back on the road, and the conversation got to, well, apart from Fletch, who amongst us has actually been overseas? Only one arm went up, and that was Jeff Zanker. But Zank was quick to add his overseas adventure was actually a 12-month tour of duty in Vietnam, and everything was organised for him by the Army, gun included. Yeah, we were keen, but we were very green. A lot would depend on Scott's management. It was 1986, so there was no internet, no mobile phones, Facebook or Instagram. I'm sure many mums and dads, girlfriends and others wondered if they would ever see us again. But as I said, everybody had enormous faith in Scott, and we honestly thought the world was ours to conquer. After some action-packed days of team bonding in Hawaii and Los Angeles, we arrived in London, and cricket quickly became our focus. We played at magnificent venues ranging from village greens all the way through to county cricket grounds. With games in London, Kent, Bath, Wales and finally Yorkshire, you can imagine the different accents and cultures that we all encountered. Some great friends of the Fletchers helped with the planning and other logistics. Michael Welsh took care of matters in London, the Godfrey Fawcett family in Kent, and Bill Edwards organised events in Wales. Scott's energy levels, honestly, they seem to be limitless. Often last to bed, but always first up in the morning. I just really wondered how he kept going. One day we were playing Merstham Hatch in rural Kent, where I think he reached his limit. Not playing myself that day, the other guys who had the day off arrived at the ground mid-afternoon we took a car to the ground mid-afternoon. Noticing his absence, someone asked where the manager was. John Smith pointed to an umbrella-shaped bush halfway around the boundary. It reached down to the ground, and protruding from the bush were two legs. Smithy said, "He's in there." And Gav Corpet was quick to add, "And I wouldn't disturb him either, he really does need a rest." True to form, Fletch emerged from his siesta about half an hour before stumps, just in time to see the Western Plains under Dirk Morrison's captaincy record a fine win. Having recharged his batteries, Scott delivered his customary post-match speech and was re-energised and keen for another solid night of socialising. The cricket highlight of the trip was undoubtedly in Yorkshire, where Skipton Cricket Club Australia played Skipton Cricket Club England. Every Western Plains player that day had played for Skipton, and the reception we all received from the locals was quite amazing. The game was evenly contested, but to our delight, the Aussies actually prevailed by 37 runs, with Tim Alexander and Andrew Wise both playing extremely well. A few days touring Scotland followed before the Plainsmen headed for home via Hong Kong and the Philippines. On arrival back in Melbourne, we were greeted by a large crowd at the airport. It was here that the manager delivered his famous statement. "I left with a bunch of boys, I returned with a team of men." We had all enjoyed the trip of a lifetime, but as far as the Western Plains World Tours went, this was only the beginning. Scott organised further tours in 1989, 93, 97 and 2001, with the list of cricketing locations visited rapidly growing. On these subsequent trips, the Western Plains played in Barbados, USA, Japan, Spain, Zimbabwe, Ireland, and always England and Wales. Some of the many Test cricketers lucky enough to play against the Western Plains included Adam Gilchrist, Mark Elam, Graham Root, Neil Foster, Robert Croft, James Whittaker, Nixon McLean, Otis Gibson and Sherwood Campbell, plus many others. In total, 69 players were lucky enough to represent the Western Plains World Touring teams in 91 games, 52 of which we won. But most importantly, taking the opportunity to travel, experience different cultures and develop lasting friendships. Obviously, without Scott's vision and a lot of hard work, none of this would ever have happened. Only a few years ago, I was up in Brisbane at a Test match, and with the Western Plains boys, of course, and I spent a bit of time with Scott, and I thanked him for all he'd done. Particularly, he'd given me the chance to travel, go to wonderful places and play cricket overseas and meet so many people and develop friendships. I said to him, Scott, you're giving me memories I'm going to have for the rest of my life. It's just fantastic. And I ever so clearly remember what he said to me. He said, the memories are great, but memories do fade. On the other hand, the friends you've made, you got them forever. I never forgot that. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Now, we've asked a few friends of Dad's to post a couple of little videos for us, so we're just going to watch that quickly now, which will go over about 10 minutes, and then there's some photos of some of the tours that he did.
In April 1972, Michael Hill, a 27-year-old left-leaning lawyer from Newcastle, met Scott Fletcher, a 22-year-old country party cocky from Geelong Grammar, on a cricket trip. Scott Fletcher and Michael Hill became friends for life. We had two things in common, a shared love of cricket and a love of travel. We shepherded each other through 3 months of cricket in Canada, the United States, Bermuda and the UK. In 1974, we tried the same recipe, this time going to South America, where we played in Peru, Argentina, Brazil, Venezuela, the West Indies and back to England. Scott was a team man ready for anything on or off the field. The floor of his hotel room was always available for those returning late, as was his defence of the country party, as it then was, measured by their ability to come through with the appropriate subsidy for the struggling cockies of Victoria. At various times, Scott planted forests until he converted to windmills, which he found much more profitable. Although separated by 1,200 kilometres, we watched Landline checking the prices of the fat lambs. He was full of wisdom, advising my wife Anne, who was concerned about a certain limping lamb, "Don't worry, Anne, you'll see it again in Woolworths in 6 weeks." Fortunately for us, we were able to catch up regularly, repeating the usual lies about whether he could turn his wrong one or carry his bat when batting in his proper pace down the order. Scott never grew older. He was still 22 when last we met in April just past. Farewell, Snake. We love you.
Thank you, Joan, for inviting us to say a few words about Scott and all the good times and things we had together. We visited England together, which was an exciting time for both Jean and myself. Also went to Tassie to the cricket, and also MCG cricket, Boxing Day Test was good, and a few other little sporting events locally. One of the local events he ran was hosting a game on the Lake Goldsmith Lake bed when it was dry. Well, the test pitch looked more like a fifth-day Mumbai test wicket than any other sort of wicket I've ever seen. It was very good times with Scott, especially another event when the Wales junior cricketers came over, and we fed them after the game with Winlaton lamb and kangaroos from Lake Goldsmith. It was very enjoyed by all. He will be sadly missed by the Collins family, as he was a great friend and a great mate. Farewell, Scott. Rest in peace. And finally, this really hurts me. Go Pies.
I was late to the party with the Western Plains World Tours. I only met Scott in 1995, but I got to do the last 2 trips and I had so much fun that I pretty much promised myself that I wouldn't miss another Fletcher tour because he knew everyone. There were going to be opportunities to see some things and meet some people that you just wouldn't get anywhere else. There were days at Lord's. There were some enormous days and nights at the Melbourne Cricket Ground and all over Australia. There was the armed militia at the cricket in Sri Lanka, not only at the cricket but also in the corridors and in the surrounds of our hotel. My own personal favourite was the flight from Kathmandu out to Mount Everest. Earlier on that same trip, we'd been introduced to the Maharaja of Jodhpur. The protocols were explained to us before the banquet. You are permitted to shake his hand as long as he offers it first. Under no circumstances are you to touch him. 15 minutes later, Scott Fletcher's got his arm around him, beer in the other hand, like they just won a premiership. I knew I was dealing with cricketing royalty when in 2018 we're on our way to the test match at Cape Town, and Jimmy Maxwell was on the radio talking about bumping into Snake Fletcher the day before with a touring party of 20-odd Australians over doing a couple of test matches. Unfortunately, Jimmy's attention turned to some sandpaper that made its way onto the ground a little bit later that same afternoon. So it took one of the biggest scandals in Australian cricket this century to push Scotty Fletcher off the airwaves. It's been one hell of a ride, manager. Thank you for sharing the last 30 years with me, and rest in peace.
It is indeed a wonderful tribute to a great man to see so many here, but not at all surprising. We are all indeed fortunate to have known the snake. He was a great friend to everyone, a superb community member and contributor wherever he went. In the Western Plains particularly, he was well known as a great cricket administrator and manager. He learned his trade in 72 from a great man called Bruce O'Sullivan, and he put all that he learnt into practice on many, many occasions and will be thanked by many for a long, long time. His attention to detail and camaraderie is absolutely excellent, and I've been lucky to be a friend. I know I've tested it on many occasions, and he's come through with flying colours in every one. There's far too many to list, but I'm sure a few of you will know a few. It was always a pleasure to see him, and he was always positive and accommodating. He will be missed by many, but never forgotten. A great man indeed. Thank you.
Roughly about Christmas 1990, staying with the Fletchers. And Fletch taught me to playing for Skipton Victoria in a fixture against Darren Allen. I hope I've pronounced that properly. This is an away game. And as any keeper, we all fancy it being an aggressive opening fast bowler. Unfortunately, my fast bowling only ran to slow, non-turning off spin, and the only drift I imparted seemed to be off the blade of the bat. But I kept telling Fletch, I want to have a go, I want to have a bowl. He says, yeah, but I really need you as a keeper. I said, yeah, but I've kept in Oz, I've never bowled in Oz. Fletch says, well, Edgy, there might be a reason for that. Anyway, I kept pushing him, and eventually he says, right, Edgy, I'm going to let you have a go. But it's a serious game, this. We've got to take it seriously. They beat us last time. We're really going for it. Yeah, I can do it, Fletch. He says, right, you can have a go. But if you're crap, I'm going to pull you off. Crikey, Fletch. That's a tad racy. The best we get in England is an orange.
Manager. I was lucky enough to go around the world with the manager 3 times. I'll just tell you a little story. We had these hire cars. The coach, he backed into an oak tree down in Canterbury. I saw a tourist dancing on top of one night. We had a red Sierra. We're going to the cricket down in Kent this morning, straight through into a wheat crop, 200 yards back out on the road. It was something you'd see in a movie. But I remember the manager, he just did this. It's right, boys, I'll look after it. Never heard another word about it. The manager's great skill was people. He just loved people. And we have to celebrate his life the best way we can. And he was an absolute giant in my world. Thank you.
Growing up or playing cricket in Skipton in the 80s, all you heard about was the 86-89 cricket trip. So in 93 came around, it was my turn. It was sort of like a rite of passage. You had to go on one of those cricket trips. So in 93, I'm ready, full of business. I was the youngest, Tony Boy, myself were the 2 youngest on the trip. And in 93, flowery shirts, it was a trendy time. So Fletch sends us away in our uniform with grey slacks, yellow polo tops, which I'm wearing now, and a green woolen V-neck jumper, straight out of the Metro Nopi 70s catalogue. Not very trendy at all. And at the time, every sporting team in Australia had a name, but the Kangaroos, Wallabies, Diamonds. We were known as the Poached Eggs, as you can see. So the Poached Eggs took off. We landed in LA, then we went to Miami as the Poached Eggs. Miami was pretty rough at the time. Murder rates high. Fletch told us to be very careful. First night in Miami, we're leaving the clubs and the pubs. We stop at a 7-Eleven. We stop for a drink and a feed on the way back to the motel. A Colombian turns up in a Lamborghini, has a talk. He said, who'd like to come to a party? I put my hand up. I said, yes, I'll be in that. I'll go to a party with you. So we drive past the motel and see Fletch on the side of the road. Fletch said, Nick, Frank, what are you doing? I said, Fletch, I'm going to a party. He said, don't be so bloody stupid. I sped off. And I remember looking back at Fletch at the time he's doing these ones, thinking, what am I going to tell Jill and Ada? Anyway, half an hour later, I wish I had to listen to Fletch because this Colombian was looking to have his way with me. I'm 28 stories up in the high rise in Miami. Realised what was going on, jumped, ran 20 flights of stairs, got down, jumped at the retainer wall, got out, wake up the next morning, go to breakfast. Scotty Fletcher called me aside. He said, Nick Frank, he said, that is the most ridiculous thing that anyone has ever done on one of these trips. Don't do it again.
Just a quick recollection of our first game on English soil, which was against the Thames Valley Gentlemen, played out at Bushy Park in London. On arriving at the ground, they all came out to greet us, dressed very smartly in their striped blazer and tie. Proceeded to come out with a tray after tray after tray of Pims, mixed Pims. So we helped them drink them and probably had 2 or 3 or 4. And then it was our turn to have a bowl. They batted first. There was no toss of the coin. They got a reasonable score. We came in for lunch. Lunch was a magnificent, typical English roast, which was accompanied by numerous bottles of wine. We did a fair job of knocking them off, and then it was our turn to bat. Pretty cunning English they were, that we batted second after having a lot more alcohol in us than they did when they batted. Anyway, cut a long story short, we were beaten by 35 runs, which is a pretty good effort. Can't remember too much more about that until it's time to go home. And where's the manager? He's sort of still talking, as he was pretty good at doing. Anyway, we get him in the car. None of us have any idea where Earl's Court is. No maps, no GPS. How do we get home, Scotty? This way, pointing. Well, nowhere really. Anyway, to keep the story short, we got into the middle of London and we finished up in the drive up to Buckingham Palace. We drove up and gave our best to the Queen and Prince Philip. And from there, we somehow stumbled across Earl's Court and we got home safely. And needless to say that we're all so proud of our manager to be able to navigate us through the middle of London at midnight and being slightly inebriated was just a wonderful feat, and very typical of how Scotty managed all of the 5 tours and every individual game he was there, doing the right thing by Western Plains. Rest in peace, mate. You're one of a kind and one of the greatest blokes I've ever met. Cheers.
Hi all, Wahin, Thailand. One small memory of Scott and my life of 5 years of a Wren boarding school at the Geelong College, 1960-64. Being good conscientious students, we found ourselves doing night school at the Gordon Bull School. With our wonderful housemaster, Fred Elliott, who we often saw in battle line, who saw us put in charge of our dormitory at 24. Scott thrived and did very well at all sport at the college. With the winding up of the old Geelong Collegians touring group, Scott got many contacts and took the Western Plains groups around the world, and what a legend he became. The rest of the all we know, the start of many tours. How many beers have ever been consumed by his touring group? Whilst in Thailand, Gail and I will travel on to Siem Reap in Cambodia to see our dear friend Danny and his family, of whom Scott and Joan have helped for so many years along, with finding funding for many students. There are many structures in Siem Reap and the local villages. Yes, Joan, we will see to Scott's love of the education of these kids and building further structures in his memories. Thank God, and bless you all. Douglas Gale, Thailand.
I remember many years ago I was out with Fletcher on his farm and he said to me, Cookie, I'm going to turn my farm into trees, sell my sheep. And I said, Fletch, I think you're a bloody idiot. And on the way home that afternoon, I had a good think about it and I thought, you know what, he's not such a dickhead after all. That's a pretty good decision. And that's the way he's been right through his life. He's made very, very good and solid decisions. But by far and away, the biggest and the best decision he ever made in his life was when he got down on bended knee and begged Joan to marry him. That was the best decision he ever made. Fletch, I'm going to miss you. You're a great man and I really loved you. Thanks.
Okay, for this next section, we've got a video that's going to be showing a few photos from Dad's tours around the world. And it's actually over one of his favourite songs. So if you feel up to it, would love a bit of audience participation to belt out this song for Dad. Thanks.
it began. I can't begin to know it, but then I know it's growing strong. Wasn't the spring, and spring became the summer. Who'd have believed you'd come along? Hand, touching hands, reaching out, touching me, touching you. Good times never seem so good. I've been inclined to believe there never was, but now I look at the night and it don't seem so lonely. We fill it up with only two. And when I hurt, burden runs off my shoulders. How can I hurt when holding you? Warm, touching warm, reaching out, touching me, touching you. The times never seem so good. I've been inclined to believe there never would. Oh, no, Sweet Caroline, the times never seem so good. Sweet Caroline, I believe they never come.
Thank you. During the 80s, Dad somehow found time for Apex. He's a life member of the Apex Club of Beaufort, and twice a year we would be at the steam rally at Lake Goldsmith, cooking donuts or feeding the masses. The blue light discos and many camping trips at Lake Fynes or Cave Hill Creek were highlights. Roxboroughs, Collinses, Gardeners, Chandlers, Gabbs, Thurgwoods and McClindons. These were incredible times, and I feel we had something on each weekend with these families. Also during this time, Dad and his mate Peter Bagnall bought 5 wool presses and started to hire them out. This proved quite lucrative until the pair of them couldn't unload the presses on Saturdays, cricket again. So the clients started rolling them off their utes near our sheds. In 1988, Dad was sick of the wet weather in the Western District and the foot troubles he was having with his sheep. He thought he wanted to farm over the divide, so after many months, he decided to buy at Campbell's Bridge stall. This could have been the most run-down farm ever seen, but Dad didn't care. What most people saw as rubbish and rabbit-fested, Dad saw as an opportunity. As kids, we spent countless hours pulling down the old sheds, removing the fences and building a new wool shed. Dad would cook when we were up there, and almost every night it was rabbit stew in the camp oven, followed by a night in the freezing caravan. As kids, we had an incredible time working all day, then setting rabbit traps, yabby nets and fishing most evenings. We're still doing this now. After the mandatory retirement from Apex, Dad joined the Lions Club in 1993 at Skipton. During this time at Lions, he held the position of president, and Mum and Dad hosted many exchanges, one of these being Cam Lee's from India. They've become firm friends and have travelled to India to both of their children's weddings. Alan Pitcher commented the other day that the camaraderie at the Skipton Lions Club was never better than when Dad was in charge or Peter Smith was fines master. In 1996, Dad had also had enough of bent grass, worms in our sheep and poor wool prices. He ran into Lee Manane at the sawmill in Beaufort, who said Nippon Paper were looking to lease country to plant blue gums in. Dad signed up for a lease of 25 acres to start with. With the guidance and quick tongue of Jim Knight and Chris Clark, all of a sudden half the farm was in trees and under lease. With the growth of the blue gum industry and the lack of employees, Jim asked Dad to come on the payroll as a Midway plantation manager. The next couple of years were a whirlwind time for him, travelling to Japan, New Zealand and Tasmania, looking at paper mills. It was an absolute junket. We would have millions of trees in our backyard, watering them and then transporting them to site. The business has employed roughly 170 people over the years, putting countless kids through university and giving many kids the start they needed in life. Andrew Bodman started his spraying business through this, and I think the Grist boys have started a bit of a dynasty with their forestry business down at Hamilton too. Dad also managed to get all his mates who had retired into doing odd jobs, or basically sweet F all. These blokes were called the Grey Army: Smithy, Roger, Roxy, Wheelie and Leslie Dennis. They just drove around the countryside replanting trees. With the influx of money from the managed investment schemes in 2000, Dad and I ramped up the forestry business. I'm still not sure how one bloke could be employed by Midway, but we had contracts to plant trees for Enviroinvest, AKD and Great Southern Plantations. These were incredible times in the district, with all the young blokes working for us and half the eel factory boys. I must thank Heck Peters, who ran this business for Dad while I was away. The carry-on in the paddocks was legendary. Orange cannons, circa work, barbecues and many boxes of beer. There's no way known under today's work cover laws any of these trees would have been planted. The Beaufort crew were so wealthy in this time, they had beer taps and barrels in their living rooms. Basically, it was on a cycle. Everyone was happily employed, pulling down fences, spraying gauze, rotary hoeing the mounds, tree measuring, planting, replanting and slashing fire breaks. The business still continues today, a lot smaller and a lot more sensible. In 2003, the neighbour's block at Stawell came up for private sale and Dad jumped at the chance to add some more good northern country. The only difference this time, it was a bloody good farm. Dad made a deal with Nev Morris and the rest is history. I think the fact that Dad allowed Nev to subdivide the house off the land and stay in the original farmhouse probably clinched the deal. The only problem for Dad was the farms were 120 kilometres apart. So poor old Nev and the Hislop boys were forever getting phone calls asking if he could borrow anything. I must thank Nev and Steve Morris and Ian and Cole Hislop for your patience and your generosity over the years. Dad also loved cutting grass hay or oaten hay, and his go-tos were small squares and he pressed them by the thousands. The only problem was they needed to be carted in by hand. Mark Gibson, Adrian Roxburgh, Butch Frank, Mark Kennedy and myself, we were his go-to guys for this job. I think what Dad loved about this was the cash he was paid by the horse people at Stawell or Bunninghill, and I'm sure only half the cash made it home. Dad also, roughly around this time, bought a Leicester stud off Harry Waldron at Caramballick. These sheep were transported to Stawell, and once again, Dad's timing was impeccable, with the rise of crossbred ewes for the prime lamb market. Dad would roughly sell about 140 rams a year through his great mate, Andrew Adamson and Barclay Dowling. However, for some reason, he always sold the best and we got left with the crap at the end.
Now, in 2006, Mum and Dad made the move into Stawell and started the next phase of their life, which was retirement and living off the land and in town. Dad's retirement plan was pretty simple. He wanted to scale back on farming and hand the reins over to Darren. He wanted to play plenty of golf, so he joined the Stawell Golf Club. He wanted to get down to Melbourne a bit more, catch up with me and Ali and the kids, watch the footy, cricket and tennis. And so Mum and Dad bought an apartment in Collingwood. And he wanted to travel the world again with Mum and his friends. And lastly, he wanted to spend more time with the kids and the grandkids. At first, it was a little bit hard for Mum and Dad to find their groove in Stawell, but both Mum and Dad are hard to resist, and they quickly started to make some really close friends in town. And they've developed some really strong friendships in the Stawell community. Dad played a particularly active role at the Stawell Golf Club, not only playing regularly, but also being the part-time greenkeeper and also organising a mountain of volunteers to help out around the club. Dad did have some success on the golf course. He had a bit of a purple patch in 2021 where he won a few of the championships, the C-Grade Championship, the Handicap Championship and the Laurie Evans Memorial Trophy. But most of all, he just really enjoyed the community side of the golf club. Today at the Stawell Golf Club, they're actually holding a separate memorial service for Dad for those people that couldn't make it down here today, and we're doing it via a video live stream. So I just want to say a quick shout out to the people in Stawell. We really thank you for welcoming Mum and Dad into the community and at the golf club, and we really appreciate all the support that you've given Mum over the last couple of weeks. And we know that you'll continue to support her over the coming weeks ahead. She's so lucky to have so many close and caring friends in Stawell. Now, over the later years, Mum and Dad well and truly reignited their love for travel. Some of their most memorable trips in recent times have been the 3 months that they spent living in Yorkshire in England with their close mates John and Jill Graham, Terry Sharp, Graham Rooney and Peter and Linda Homden. That holiday was probably the perfect combination for the old man. It was England, there was lots of local cricket. The 2019 Ashes just happened to be on that year as well. He managed to get up to Scotland to watch the British Open, and he spent plenty of time catching up with his old mates that he'd met through his cricket touring days. Mum and Dad also bought a camper van. It was affectionately known as Daisy, and they used that to avoid the COVID lockdowns in Victoria and live the grey nomad lifestyle for a while. Daisy was a great investment. It allowed Mum and Dad to keep experiencing new things, tripping around the countryside, whilst overseas travel was off the cards. Their most recent trip to Japan and Korea was only in March this year, where they immersed themselves in the culture. I know that he jumped from little restaurant to little restaurant, sampling all the Asahi on tap for me, and ate heaps of Japanese food. One of the highlights for Dad, though, was he actually went to the demilitarisation zone between the North and South Korea border, which he thought was really interesting. One thing that I'm particularly proud of is the volunteer work that Mum and Dad have done in Cambodia. A lot of people probably don't realise this about Mum and Dad, but they went over there probably 10 years ago and made really close friends with one of their tour guides, a guy called Deneth, who they call Danny, in Siem Reap. And since then, meeting him then through their own charity, but also through getting generous support from other individuals and charity organisations, both in Stawell and around Skipton. They've built 20 clean drinking water wells in regional parts of Cambodia. And they've also built a pretty large-scale toilet and amenity blocks at a number of primary schools in Siem Reap. This generosity will improve the thousands of lives of Cambodians, and it's something that I'm really proud of. Now I'm going to pass over to Fiona and Christy now, who are going to talk through who Dad was as a father, husband and grandfather.
Hi, my name's Christy. I'm Mum and Dad's third child and the one that lives in Western Australia. I have the privilege of talking about Dad being Dad. I was Dad's chief gate opener on the farm, or maybe it was my way of getting away from my three siblings. I loved being on the farm with Dad and enjoyed all aspects of life. There are stories of us kids falling asleep in the wool during shearing time, leaving gates open and boxing up mobs of sheep, pushing each other off the back of the ute while Dad was trying to drive around the farm. Learning how to drive at the age of 12 and maybe bending a few gates in the process, and Dad having us in the bucket of the tractor and tipping us into the pool in the middle of winter. Nothing really fazed Dad when we were growing up. I can't really remember him getting cranky, even when Scotty decided to park the tractor in the dam. Darren putting the golf club through the side of the pool, and Fiona pretty much refusing to do anything that required her to get her hands dirty. He just had a laugh, got on with it, and resolved the problem. During our childhood, Dad, who although he'd never admit it, was the proud owner of Western District's worst sheepdog, our Labrador Toby. Dad always jokingly said the dog was annoying and useless, but wherever Dad was, Toby was tied on the back of the ute. His big floppy ears blowing in the wind, living his best life. The noise of Toby barking in the sheep yards, thinking he was being helpful, Dad yelling at him to dry up and swearing under his breath, Toby running through a mob of sheep in the yards when the gate wasn't shut properly, made for sheep work being comical most days. This so-called useless Labrador dog always managed to get a lift home to the house at the end of the day and lifted off the back of the ute and fed. When Mum and Dad purchased the farm at Stawell, it provided so many fabulous times. In the early days, the accommodation consisted of a very old caravan parked down near the Wimmera River under 2 gum trees. I'm not sure if we had power, but because Dad was never really a camper, it certainly felt like it was as close as we were going to get. The fun of yabbying, hunting, swimming in the dams, fishing in the Wimmera River and Scotty eating witchetty grubs off the campfire are all fabulous memories. It was fun and happy times. The old van was eventually moved up to the new wool shed where it was stolen and dragged down the road, which resulted in the new wool room, or affectionately what we call the love shack, was built. The days at the Stawell farm are my most treasured memories of Dad. He was in his element up there, and we all loved the sense of adventure every time we went. Whenever I came home from Western Australia, I always made an effort to get out to the farm with Dad and with my girls so they could have a glimpse at my childhood and this special place to me. When Dad was in ICU in Melbourne, we did a list of the countries that he'd visited, and we think the number's between 55 and 60. Which is an amazing number when you consider it is basically 1 a year since he's been an adult. So it's no surprise that his family got to go on his annual golf trip to Yarrawonga and Moala every year. It was the best week of our year, an indoor swimming pool, tennis court and unlimited Nintendo computer games. And I guess Dad played a bit of golf. His common statement was, "You can travel overseas when you can pay for it yourselves." We all have notched up a few countries, but we've got a few to go to beat his record. In 1987, Mum made the big decision to head to Thailand for 2 weeks on a girls' trip and leave the 4 kids in Dad's capable hands. Well, his mates rallied around him and Bill Mulcahy decided that he would come and cook us dinner, a fancy spaghetti bolognese. Portion sizes weren't really Bill's thing, and he decided to feed 4 hungry kids who'd need 3 bags of spaghetti. There was spaghetti everywhere. I think we had leftovers for the next 4 nights. The dog ate it for a week. Half went in the bin, and we ate at 10 p.m. Dad didn't care because it meant he didn't have to cook for the next 4 days. We survived those 2 weeks and we're pretty happy when Mum rocked on. 3 of us 4 kids headed off to boarding school in Geelong following in Dad's footsteps. Mum and Dad loved coming down on the weekends, getting involved in the school community and watching us play sport. I played my netball at 8 a.m. on a Saturday and Scotty generally played footy in the afternoon, so they would often be seen catching up with old school buddies, seeing Marg and John and attending school functions. I know Dad was very proud that he could send his children to Geelong College and allow us to experience boarding school. I always say it was the best 3 years of my life. When we all finished school, it was time to have a little bit of adventure, which meant heading overseas. Darren, Fiona and Scotty all headed to England and I went farming in Canada. It was no surprise that Mum, Dad, Gwenny and Peter came and saw me in Canada and managed to catch up with the others in England. Taking them to the local cowboy pub, Billy Bob's Saloon, for a bit of two-stepping and Canadian beers, heading up into the Rockies to see the grizzly bears and the amazing scenery when I was just 18 was very cool. As a broke backpacker, we all thought it was great when Mum and Dad rocked up. It meant it was their shout for a few beers and a decent meal. During boarding school, coming home from overseas or when we were at university, we had the luxury of coming home and working for Dad on the farm or blue gumming. This business effectively paid for all of our first cars, overseas travel and maybe a beer or 2 at the local pub. Dad always had a job that needed to be done, and if it meant heading away for a couple of days with him, I was in. Whether it was pulling down fences in the snake-infested Otways or measuring cheese, it was always an adventure, and I just loved it. Sport was always something we did as a family. I can remember spending many a summer Saturdays at the Skipton, Lismore and Derrinellum ovals. I can't say I watched a lot of cricket, and I'm pretty sure we just went to get into town, get a pub dinner, a raspberry lemonade and a trip home in the back of the car pretending we were asleep. Dad was always the one to have to carry me in when we got home because I had the heaviest bones of all of us. Once we all started playing sport, this pretty much took over our weekends, with Mum becoming the taxi. There was netball, football, cricket, basketball, tennis and ballet. Dad was happy to come and watch the ball sports, but once a year he was dragged out of the pub on a Saturday night for Fiona's ballet recital. For some reason I had to go and we had to both suffer through it. During our early adult lives, at some point we all played footy or netball for Skipton. In 2001, Scotty and I were part of the best day in club history when Skipton broke their 20-year football premiership flag drought. Scotty, as a 17-year-old, played in the football premiership team and me in the A-grade netball premiership. For the next 10 years, Skipton had so much success and Dad just loved being there through the involvement of his kids. Heading to the MCG to watch the footy was also something we regularly did. We would regularly head down to watch the Mighty Pies or Geelong, even attending a number of grand finals. In those days, we had to rock up at 6 a.m. to the grand finals to get a decent seat and stay there all day. They did have games prior, but it meant for a really long day of sitting around doing not much, waiting for the big game. People are always amazed at how Mum got all 6 of us into the grand final, but as you would know, if someone was going to organise it, it would be Mum. Every trip to the G was topped off with Chinese dinner in Ballarat on the way home. That was and still is Dad's favourite. Dad watched the Pies lose a few grand finals and win a few. It's just so fantastic that he was at the G last year and watched his beloved Pies win the grand final. He rang me on that day after the game and he was just so excited and overjoyed. He was in his element and so bloody happy. So thank you, Dad, for being awesome. Thank you for being an awesome grumpy. Thank you for creating a loving, fun and enjoyable life that we've all lived together. Thank you for instilling in me a sense of adventure, book the tickets, go on the holidays, see the world and enjoy every minute. Thank you for showing me how to be part of our community, giving back and creating lifelong friendships. Thank you for picking up my phone call every day and having a chat and wanting to know what was happening in my life and my family. But most of all, thank you for being the best dad, and go Pies.
Hi everyone, my name is Fiona Fief, or as Dad would occasionally call me, Lady Muck. Today I have the great honour of talking about Grumpy. Dad first became a Grumpy nearly 17 years ago with the birth of Sophie, followed quickly by Harry, Grace, George, and then a string of girls, Molly, Evie, Libby, Matilda, Pippa. Just as we were losing hope of getting the elusive Fletcher grandson, we had the arrival of Archie and Henry Fletcher. Christy was telling the story the other day of when Archie was born. Grumpy and Daz were in the kitchen at stall when the news came through. Grumpy just kept doing what he was doing with just a little bit more of a smile on his face, and Daz was in the background doing fist pumps because the pressure was off. We were also lucky when the kids were babies to be able to pop them in the car and head to Gran and Grumpy's for a few days of their love and support. As with everything Dad did, he was no different as a Grumpy. He was such a proud Grumpy and so involved and present. Anything the kids did, he got up and did it with them, from water pistol fights, wrestling, footy, cricket, netball, boogie boarding, surfing, jet skiing, really anything that involved physical activity. He was in his element, trying to upstage and beat the grandkids, even right up into the last school holidays when my boys were in stall playing golf and hitting the gym with Grumpy. And only a few weeks ago, he was down in Melbourne showing the Fletcher kids how to shoot a netball and kick a footy. With all of his 11 grandchildren, he was able to have a special relationship which made them all feel valued and loved. He was immensely proud of each and every one of them. And any opportunity, he would go along and watch their sport if he was in the country. But I have to say, anything that involved singing, dancing or concerts, ballet, he was always just a little bit too busy to get to those. From when the grandkids got old enough and started being interested in the AFL, Grumpy started the family tradition of betting a Mars bar. Every time Collingwood would play one of his grandkids' teams, he'd ring them up, bet a Mars bar. Now, Collingwood have been pretty successful over the years, but Grumpy, being Grumpy, it was always the grandkids to walk away with the Mars bar. I think Grumpy's dream would have been to one day change the bet from a Mars bar to buying a beer in the MCC Percy Beams bar. As a family and as families, we all spent many wonderful holidays, weekends, nights and days together. Grumpy loved going to Broome to spend time with the Malinkovic girls, and even last year volunteered to go and babysit. Christy was wondering who was doing the babysitting, but it was just Dad's excuse to go sit on Cable Beach and do a spot of surfing with the girls. A highlight was definitely Grumpy's 70th, when we flew over to WA to surprise him. It was such a memorable family time, topped off with a day at the footy watching the D's win. This week is something we will treasure forever. Another example of Grumpy's adventurous spirit was when James and I were travelling to Broome with our kids, and we were 200 k's north of Broome at a place called Cape Levique for a couple of nights. Grumpy was staying with Christy and doing a fly around to see Mitchell Falls and a few of the other gorges. There was a stop for lunch at Cape Levique where we were camping for a few nights. We told the kids that there was a plane coming in with a celebrity on it. They had no idea that it was Grumpy. We went down to the airport to meet this celebrity. The kids were all excited, guessing who it could be. And when the plane landed and the doors opened and out popped Grumpy, the kids were surprised but slightly disappointed that it wasn't Jessica Melboy. We had the most perfect day on the beach, out in the middle of the nowhere, and it's such a wonderful memory for us all. I would say that one of Grumpy's favourite things was having his grandkids with him at the Stall Farm. We've talked about the farm a bit today, but we have so many memories of days and weekends spent out there. Give Grumpy family, campfire, a footy, a lamb chop, and inevitably a I wonder what the poor people are doing, and he was the happiest Grumpy ever. Mum, what a privilege it was to grow up within such a wonderful marriage, witnessing such love, friendship, laughter, kindness, adventure and respect. All your children have replicated this in our own homes, and this is something that will pass on to the next generation. The guidance of a great man is such a blessing. Finally, think about something you've always wanted to do or a place you've always wanted to visit, and just do it, because as Dad taught us, life is an adventure and it's meant to be lived to the fullest. Dad really did have the trip of a lifetime. Dad, Grumpy, we love you and we miss you every day. Toodly pip.
Okay, thanks everyone. We're nearly there. We've just got one more short video, which is just to highlight some of the photos with the grandkids, and then we'll wrap things up.
The old hometown looks the same as I step down from the train, and there to meet me is my mama and papa. Down the road I look, and there runs Mary, hair of gold and lips like cherries. It's good to touch the green, green grass of home. Yes, they'll all come to meet me, arms reaching reaching, smiling sweetly. It's good to touch the green, green grass of home. The old house is still standing, though the paint is cracked and dry. And there's that old oak tree that I used to play on. Down the lane I walk with my sweet Mary, hair of gold and lips like cherries. It's good to touch the green, green grass of home. Then I awake and look around me at 4 gray walls that surround me, and I realize, yes, I was only dreaming. For there's a God and there's a sad old portrait. On and on we'll walk at daybreak. Again I'll touch the green, green grass of home. Yes, they'll all come to see me in the shade of that old oak tree as they lay me neath the green, green grass of home. The old hometown looks the same as I step down from the train, and there to meet me is my mama and papa. Down the road I look, and there runs Mary, hair of gold and lips like cherries. It's good to touch the green, green grass of home. Yes, they'll all come to meet me, arms reaching, smiling sweetly. It's good to touch the green, green grass of home. The old house is still standing, though the paint is cracked and dry. And there's that old oak tree that I used to play on. Down the lane I walk with my sweet Mary, hair of gold and lips like cherries. It's good to touch the green, green grass of home. Then I awake and look around me at 4 gray walls that surround me, and I realize, yes, I was only dreaming. For there's a God and there's a sad old portrait. On and on we'll walk.
We're just going to finish off. As we've just heard about, Dad was big on life experiences, and there's no better example of his views on 21st birthday parties. His offer to all of us was, you can have a party, or I'll buy you a return ticket to anywhere in the world, but you must do 6 months away. He would add in this conversation, I'll pump the beer, other word, down your mates' throats and no one will remember it by Wednesday. Or you can get an incredible experience that will last a lifetime. It's the same cost to me. We all took the plane tickets. Dad also had a habit of calling everyone by their full name. Graham Rooney, Darryl Rowe, Lyle McInerney, to name a few. I think this endeared him to people even more. One of Dad's greatest legacies is that after succession planning and grandkids and all the other stuff when your children get married, he accepted all our partners as his own. The fact that the four of us kids sat down a fortnight ago with Mum and talked about what was best for Dad with no judgment or anger says everything about this man. It was an excruciating decision, and each decision held equal weight. That was Scott. He was fair until the end. It's time to say goodbye, Dad. I love you and everything you did for us. And it's a bit of a theme, this, but I'd give anything for you to rub your head one last time and say, geez, you're a smart ass.
Okay, so that about concludes the service. Thanks everyone for attending. I've just got a couple of closing comments. I'd just like to reiterate that we really appreciate all the support that you've provided to us over the last month or so, and particularly in the last 2 weeks since Dad's passing. It has been a very challenging time for the family, but with your support, we will get through this together. I'd also like to thank the ICU team down at the Epworth in Melbourne. By the time Dad got to Melbourne, he was in a bad way, and they did everything they could to make him well, but the task was just too big. We were amazed by the professionalism and the care they showed, both Dad and us, whilst we were down in Melbourne. So in closing, Dad truly was Scott with the lot. I'm not sure how he managed to fit it all in. You've heard about his contributions to the community over the years, and as well as being just a great mate to so many people. You've heard about his entrepreneurial spirit and how he expanded from just a 640-acre soldier settlement block to buying another 3 farms, all while building out a tree planting empire and contributing over 170 jobs to the local area, whilst having side hustles on the go, like he's bought a Leicester stud, he's hay carting and he's wool classing. You've heard how he travelled the world, starting in his early 20s and never really slowing down, seeing more than 50 countries over the years. And you've heard about how he was truly an amazing father, husband and grandfather. We are incredibly proud and fortunate to have had Scott as our father. And for many of you, you should feel extremely lucky that you could call Scott a friend. I think we knew he was special, but now I think we all know that he was truly an extraordinary man. We loved him dearly and we're all going to miss him very much, but he will never be forgotten. I'd like you all to stand, please, for one final applause for Scott for a life well lived.
Three cheers for Scott. Hip hip. Hip hip. Hip hip.
I was humping me bluey along the dusty Unadata road when along came a semi with a high and canvas covered load. He said,
if you're going to Unadata, mate, me you can ride.
So I climbed into the cabin and I settled down inside. He asked me,
have you seen a road? So much dust and sand.
And I said, listen mate, I travelled every road in this here land. Course I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere, man. Across the deserts bare, man. I've breathed the mountain air, man. I've travelled, I've had my share, man. I've been everywhere. Between the Tullamore, Seymour, Lismore, Mooloolaba, Mambo, Bridgeville, Kilmore, Mooloolaba, Birdsville, Liverpool, Wallaville, Cunnamulla, Condamoy, Strathpine, Crosspine, Ulladulla, Darwin, Ginger, Dillon, Muckatoo, Wallumbilla, Buckabrilla, Coverilla, I'm a killer. I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere, man. Across the deserts bare, man. I've breathed the mountain air, man. I've travelled, I've had my share, man. I've been everywhere. Winnemore, Tari, Drillery, Bambury, Toowoomba, Canada, Kangaroo, Woolloomooloo, Dalveen, Tambourine, Nicotine, Jindabyne, Lithgow, Casino, Brigalow, Narrabine, Mickalong, Wyong, Tuckerwong, Wanganilla, Morilla, Orgazella, Brindabella, Rumfell. I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere, man. Across the deserts bare, man. I've breathed the mountain air, man. I've travelled, I've had my share, man. I've been everywhere. I've been a Wollongong, Geelong, Currajong, the one living in a gong, Golang, Grum, Grum, Gunda, Winnie, Yarra, Yarra, Boom, Narra, Wallam, Yarra, Tara, Mara, Bogger, Broad, Gunda, Grind, Narra, Boy, Tipper, Go, Gong, Never Long, Billabong, Carametta, Parramatta, Wonga, Radical, and Gala, what's the matter? I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere, man. Cross the deserts bare, man. I've breathed the mountain air, man. I've travelled, I've had my share, man. I've been everywhere. I've been away along, down along, Wooden Bong, Ballarat, Dander, Amadura, Captain Flat, Pond, Curry, River, Murray, Curry, Girraween, Terracool, Fingals, Cottonball, Collaroid, Narrabeen, Bendigo, Dorica, Bangalow, Inverbilly, Kirribilly, Urunbilly, Walladoo, Don't be silly. I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere, man. Cross the deserts bare, man. I've breathed the mountain air, man. I've travelled, I've had my share, man. I've been everywhere. I've been here, there, everywhere. I've been everywhere.